Using the wrong resin is like using peanut butter as glue. You just don't want to do it. Hello crafters, I'm Brandy. Today I'm going to walk you through different types of resin and how to use them. So there are multiple types of resins out there, and each one has a purpose for a certain type of project. So I will go through the ones that I use on a regular basis and let you know what they're for and how you can use them in your projects. So I'm going to start with the one I use the most, which is epoxy resin. There are several different brands, and that's going to be the same with all the resin that I'm going to talk about today. So the epoxy resin can be used with anywhere from small to medium-sized molds. Like here's a skull, flower, dragon, and then you'll have results like these. And it can also be used in molds like these that aren't too thick, but they are larger, but they're not thick. And they can also be used in smaller molds. It just takes longer to dry. And a majority of the resin is going to come in multiple parts. UV resin is different. It usually comes just as the one bottle already mixed, and it requires a UV light to cure. But the other resins, like the epoxy resin, will come in different parts. There's like part A and part B, which this one is the resin and this one is the hardener. You want to follow the directions on each of the bottles for mixing that together. And usually for the epoxy resin, it's just one part A to one part B. And when you're mixing those, you want to make sure you mix it all the way. It's going to be completely clear. But when you first start mixing it, you're going to see like cloudy lines in there. And you want those cloudy lines to disappear to where it's just completely clear. And that will take anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes. It really all depends. And like I said, there are multiple companies out there. There is Bondcrafter that I really love. Bondcrafter's UV and deep pour resin. I actually prefer Let's Resin's epoxy resin. Personally, it's just the consistency of Let's Resin that I like better than the Bondcrafter. But the Bondcrafter is at a better cost than the Let's Resin is. So if you're looking for a more budget-friendly, Bondcrafter is the way to go. And like I said, I love their UV resin, and their deep pour resin is really awesome as well. We just started using that. And another thing you want to look on the labels for is the working time. So after the resin is completely mixed together, you have a certain amount of time that you can work with it. So pouring it or mixing the colors in, that is considered the working time. And it'll be on the label for how much working time that the resin allows for. Each one is different. It also depends on the temperature of the room. So when you're working with resin, it's best between 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's cooler in the room, then the resin's going to take longer to cure. If it's hotter in the room, the resin's going to cure faster. So you just kind of want to be aware of the temperature. And regular epoxy resin usually takes about 24 to 48 hours to completely cure. Like I said, it depends on the temperature of the room that it's in. And I just want to put this in here. Before you start any resin project, make sure you do have the proper equipment. I did make another video. It's just a starter video on the supplies that you're going to need. So please watch that if you haven't used resin yet or you're still new to resin. It just kind of walks you through the different safety precautions you need, like mask or gloves, and just the basics for getting started with your resin. So I'll put the link up there in the corner for you so you can come back and watch that. So epoxy resin. The next one I'm going to talk about is UV resin. Bondcrafter's is my preferred, which I've only used Bondcrafter's and Let's Resin. Because like I said, the epoxy resin is more for what I do. But I have started making some jewelry. UV resin is the best for the smaller molds, making jewelry. But you do want to make sure that you use the clear molds. You don't want to be using the baking or the chocolate molds that are like pink or brown or whatever the thick color, because UV resin has to be cured with a UV light. And this is a UV light right here. I recently bought this one because, like I said, I started stuff all over, got crap all over it. But like I said, I just recently started making a little bit more jewelry. think you'll see here the little mushroom earrings. I used the mold to make the mushroom shape, but I used the acrylic paint to paint on there. Really proud of these, actually. I think they turned out great, but I bought these. I bought this UV light to help out. It's a dual light, so it gets the top and the bottom, and it's got the little door thing here, and you place it like that, and it's got a little timer. It does 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or 5 minutes. And when it comes to UV resin, it will let you know on the labeling how long you need to cure the resin for. But UV resin is really good for like little touch-ups or for making jewelry or just the smaller molds. But like I said, just get the clear ones so that the light can get to it on both sides. Because if you get the thick colored ones that are meant for like chocolate or baking, then the light's not going to be able to get through to all of it, and you're going to have just a goopy mess, pretty much is what you're going to have. So UV light is a must-have if you're going to be using the UV resin. And just these smaller clear molds, you can get these on Amazon, Hobby Lobby, Michaels, any crafting store, or I know Temu has them, but yeah, just research the little jewelry resin molds. You'll be able to find the silicone, make sure it's silicone. There are links in the description below if you're interested in getting something similar to this or any of the resins that I have available or I've talked about today. If you're interested in those at all, I'll have the link in the description so you can get right to it. And UV resin is a little easier to work with because you don't have to do the mixing. The odor is very, very low, and it's super fast curing. So you don't have to wait 24 to 48 hours like the epoxy resin to have your results. It'll be within minutes. Let's Resin does have another type of UV resin. It's called a kit for bonding, and it comes with this little UV light. I really like this one for just quickly gluing stuff together. So I do use this one a lot as well, but it's got like a really solid bond between two items, and it's really quick. It takes like 5 seconds with the little light to cure it, but you don't use it the same way. It's not used in the mold. It's just used for bonding stuff together. You bond metal to metal or glass or plastic or resin to resin. So really good buy right there. And the next one we're going to talk about is deep pour resin. So when you have a project that is going to be more than 2 inches by 2 inches, so like I said, having a thinner pour that is bigger is fine to use epoxy resin. But if you're going for a thick pour like this cube, you want to use deep pour resin. Otherwise, you're going to have a big issue with heat and bubbles and fumes and all sorts of bad stuff. But a lot of times, if you want to create those projects that are like the squares where you're putting a bouquet of flowers in there from like a wedding or something, deep pour resin is the way to go on that. Or if you're doing a project like you want to do like a underwater project with like a turtle or something in there, or a whale or a dolphin, then you will want to use the deep pour resin. So for the deep pour resin, it is also portioned out a ratio, and it's usually 2 to 1. So like for this one, it's 2 parts A to 1 part B. But it does work the same way as the epoxy resin. It's going to take longer to dry. So the deep pour resin will usually take 48 to 72 hours to dry, but you want it to be drying slower. You want it to be heating up slower because it's going to create less bubbles. It's not going to cause the warping or the fumes that would be caused if you try to use epoxy resin in that deep of a pour. For those sort of projects, like you want to be using the deep pour resin for those projects. And the last one I want to talk to you about today is the tabletop epoxy resin. This one is not for actually making the table pours. This one is just a clear epoxy coating. So it's used as a finishing coat to make a really hard, durable, shiny, UV protected, waterproof surface for a tabletop or for a resin project that you've done. And this epoxy is also preferred if you're going to be making the canvas epoxy art. Like I've seen people put like little crystals or sand or stuff like that on a canvas and do the epoxy pour on top of that. because this one is also self-leveling, which I forgot to mention that the regular epoxy and the deep pour, they're all self-leveling. So just make sure whenever you're drying that you're drying it on a level surface, so that it's not going to come out all crooked. I've done that before. So yes, make sure your drying surface is level. But this one is also a 1-to-1 ratio, and always make sure that you check the labels because each brand will be a little bit different. So that wraps it up for the resin. If there's something you're still confused on or that I didn't cover that you have a question on, please leave it in the comments. I'll get back to you on that. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for future videos. I'm working on putting together more videos for this beginner series to help you guys out. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.